Have you ever looked at your grown child and wondered, when did I become a stranger to them? One day they were running into your arms after school, clinging to your every word. Now they avoid your calls, respond with silence, or speak with a coldness that cuts deeper than any scream. The transformation is not sudden, but when it happens, it feels like an emotional earthquake that leaves no room for explanation, only rubble. And in that silence, many parents begin to blame themselves, or worse, resent their own children without ever understanding the root of this rejection. Sigmund Freud taught us that no emotion disappears. It only changes form, hiding itself beneath the layers of memory and defense mechanisms. The love a child once had for their parent can be buried under years of unspoken pain, unmet needs, or unresolved expectations. It doesn't vanish. It calcifies into distance, into short replies, into holidays missed and hugs withheld. When Freud spoke of repression, he wasn't just referring to forbidden desires, but also to wounds too complex to name, too subtle to scream, yet powerful enough to destroy the most sacred of bonds. This rejection, more than rebellion, often masks a silent cry. The adult child is not pushing you away as a parent. They are pushing away the version of themselves they had to become under your roof. A version shaped not always by cruelty, but by your own unconscious traumas passed down like invisible heirlooms. The unspoken fears, the withheld affection, the words said in moments of exhaustion, all carved deep impressions that now resurface in their detachment. Freud would say, what is not made conscious returns as fate. But this is not a narrative of blame. This is a mirror, a chance to understand that what your child rejects may not be you, but the weight of your unexamined pain living through them. They seek not revenge, but freedom, and yet that freedom feels like abandonment to a parent who gave everything, who sacrificed, who never imagined that love could end in silence. The paradox is cruel. The very love that raised them may be the love they now need distance from in order to heal. So the real question is not why they reject you, but what truth are they still trying to escape? And perhaps even more important, are you brave enough to look into that truth without defensiveness, without guilt, and without the need to be right? Because sometimes to repair the bridge, we must first understand why it burned, and accept that the fire did not begin in them, but in the echoes of what we once refused to face. It's easy to point the finger at the present, as if today's pain was born just yesterday. But Freud taught us that the unconscious does not follow the calendar. It keeps everything. The rejection of a parent by an adult child is not a sudden gesture, nor a simple mistake. It is the echo of a past that was never truly heard. When a parent finds themselves ignored by the very person they raised, the instinct is to ask, what did I do wrong? But the Freudian question is different. The real question is, what did I fail to notice? Childhood, Freud said, is the silent theater where the lifelong dramas of the psyche are staged. Every word spoken with indifference, every absence justified by busyness, every gaze that asked for affection and received correction, none of it disappears. It stays, and the child grows up believing they must distance themselves in order to survive, not from the parent themselves, but from the pain that follows them like a shadow. Rejection, then, becomes an unconscious attempt to escape the emotional weight encoded in the word family. In psychoanalysis, we understand that love and resentment coexist. An adult child can love their parent deeply and still carry an anger they cannot name. It's a divided, conflicted affection. That's why when an adult child pulls away, they are not necessarily rejecting the person, but the unresolved conflict that person represents. Looking into a parent's eyes might mean seeing their younger self, powerless, confused, starved for approval. Rejection in that case becomes a form of self-protection. Freud believed that the strongest bonds are also the most dangerous. Precisely because they are charged with such powerful emotions, they require psychic balance. And when that balance fails, the mind seeks escape. Sometimes that escape is silence. It's not calling, it's avoiding conversation. Not out of cruelty, but as an unconscious self-defense. What seems like coldness is to the unconscious survival, even healing. The adult child withdraws not because they do not love, but because they do not know how to love without getting hurt. And this is where our journey begins. by understanding that rejection is rarely about the present and almost always about what was repressed, that behind every closed door there is an untold story. Freud does not invite us to judge, but to listen. Not to demand, but to interpret, because in the end what the child rejects may very well be what the parent never had the courage to face in themselves. To understand the roots of rejection, we must return to the blueprint of the mind, the childhood home. Freud often described the family as the original stage of all psychic conflict, where the child first learns about power, love, and disappointment. In that space, every moment is magnified. A parent's silence after a bad grade, a sarcastic remark, the absence at a school play. These are not minor memories. They are, in the mind of the child, mythological wounds, and like myths, they grow in symbolism over time until they become sacred stories of pain. The child does not interpret the world rationally. They internalize it, and if love is inconsistent, they blame themselves. I must be unworthy. That seed, once planted, becomes a tree of resentment disguised as independence. As adults, they may say, I don't need my parents, but Freud would argue, they needed them too much. So much that the pain of unmet needs turned into cold detachment. They stopped asking because the silence hurt less than the rejection. Freud also taught us about repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to repeat unresolved trauma in different forms. An adult child who avoids the parent may unconsciously be reliving the rejection they once felt. But now, they take control. They reject first. They go silent before you can. Not to hurt you, but to survive what they still haven't processed. The parent, confused and heartbroken, often doesn't see that the silence is not indifference. It is a defense rehearsed for years until it became identity. And here lies the tragedy. Both sides are hurting and neither knows how to speak it. The parent sees ingratitude. The child sees pain. The parent says, I did everything I could. The child thinks, but you never saw me. One speaks from sacrifice, the other from absence. And both are right in their own minds. But the unconscious doesn't care who's right. It only cares what is unresolved. And what's unresolved will always return, in silence, in distance, in rejection. So we must stop asking, why don't they call, and start asking, what part of their story am I not hearing? Because only when we listen without defense can we begin to rebuild what was buried. And perhaps discover that behind the rejection is not hate, but a wounded love begging to be understood. Reconciliation begins not with conversation, but with introspection. Freud insisted that true healing starts when we make the unconscious conscious. For parents, this means daring to look inward, not at what they did for their children, but at what parts of themselves they unknowingly projected onto them. Were you trying to give your child what you never received? Were you molding them in your image or truly seeing who they were? Many parents raise children while still haunted by their own inner child. Unresolved traumas leak into parenting through overprotection, criticism, or emotional distance. A father who was never validated might demand perfection from his son. A mother who was neglected might smother her daughter, confusing control with care. These patterns are not intentional. They are inherited. Freud called them transference, and they are the ghosts that live in every family interaction. When adult children pull away, they may be rejecting not just their parent, but the shadow of their parents' unresolved wounds. This is why healing cannot begin with a demand for respect or gratitude. It must begin with acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, you passed on a weight you didn't know you were carrying. That your love, while real, might have come wrapped in pain. And that your child's distance is not betrayal, it's self-preservation. The hardest truth a parent can face is this: love is not always felt as love. What you meant as discipline may have been felt as rejection. What you offered as support may have been received as pressure. In Freud's world, intention does not absolve emotional impact, and to repair, we must honor the experience of the other, not just our own narrative. This is not about guilt. It's about responsibility, the kind of responsibility that says, I see now what I could not see then. I hurt you without meaning to, and I'm willing to face that truth, not to be forgiven, but to understand. Because understanding is the first door through which healing walks. Freud often spoke of the return of the repressed, the idea that anything pushed out of awareness will eventually find a way back in, often in distorted or destructive forms. In families, this return is rarely loud. It's not the scream, it's the absence, the silence, the birthday not remembered, the hug not given. These are the symptoms of emotional truths that were never addressed. Adult children who withdraw are not always angry. Sometimes they are numb, and numbness is more dangerous than rage. Rage speaks, numbness disappears. It's the sign of a psyche that no longer expects repair, only escape. When a parent says, "I don't know what happened," the answer may lie in all the things that were never said, never apologized for, never truly felt. This is the moment where most families break down, not because there is no love, but because there is no language for that love. The child doesn't know how to say, "You hurt me," without fearing judgment. The parent doesn't know how to say, "I failed," without drowning in shame. And so they dance around the truth, pretending that time will fix what only truth can. But truth is terrifying. It demands vulnerability. It requires the parent to say, "I was wrong," and the child to say, "I needed more." Freud knew that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the beginning of transformation. When we strip away pride, the real self can emerge. And in that emergence, something miraculous can begin. A reconnection based not on perfection, but on honesty. If you are a parent reading this, you may feel resistance rising. But I tried my best. Yes, you did. And still the pain remains. Not because you were a bad parent, but because you were human. And healing begins when we stop defending our goodness and start exploring our blind spots. Because only then can we create a space where love is no longer a battlefield, but a bridge. Freud believed that the family is the first mirror in which we see ourselves. But what if that mirror was cracked? What if the reflection the child saw growing up was distorted by projections, criticisms, or emotional neglect? They grow up never quite knowing if they are lovable, or only loved when they perform. That doubt becomes a lifelong wound, shaping relationships, identity, and self-worth. The adult child who now distances themselves may be trying to repair that mirror, not with revenge, but with boundaries. They are not punishing their parents, they are finally choosing themselves. For the first time, they are saying, "My peace matters, my pain matters." Freud would call this individuation, the process of separating from the parental image to become a whole self. But this individuation often feels like rejection to the parent, especially if the parent built their identity around sacrifice. "I gave up everything for you," they say. And yet the child replies, "But I never asked you to." This dissonance is painful. It reveals how love, when entangled with expectation, can feel like a cage. The child doesn't reject love. They reject the weight that came with it. To heal, both sides must deconstruct the myths they built around each other. The parent must stop seeing the child as ungrateful. The child must stop seeing the parent as a villain, because beneath the pain, there is a deeper truth. They were both trying to love with broken tools, tools inherited from generations past, tools shaped by survival, not by emotional fluency. And now the work begins, not to erase the past, but to reframe it, not to change what was, but to change what it means. Freud believed that once we interpret the dream, we are no longer held hostage by it. And so it is with family. Once we understand the meaning behind the silence, the distance, the pain, we are free to write a new story. When a child distances themselves from a parent, the silence can feel louder than any scream. But Freud warned us, the unconscious never stays silent. It speaks through absence, through avoidance, through the tension in a room where no one says what truly matters. Many parents wait for time to heal, believing that distance is a phase. But repression does not age gracefully. It festers, and the longer the truth remains buried, the more distorted the relationship becomes. The unconscious doesn't count birthdays or track holidays. It remembers impressions, moments charged with emotion. That day you said something in anger. That time you weren't there, or worse, when you were present in body but absent in spirit. These become emotional landmarks for the child, coded not in memory, but in feeling. They grow up associating parent with tension, pressure, or invisibility. And even when the parent has changed, the internalized version still haunts them. Freud believed that the present is often just the stage where the past plays out in disguise. The adult child may avoid you, but what they are truly avoiding is the pain they associate with your presence. And unless that pain is acknowledged, no gesture of love can penetrate the wall. It's not enough to say, "I love you." The question is, can your child feel safe in your love? Can they be flawed, angry, vulnerable, and still be held, not corrected? Rebuilding that safety requires more than apologies. It requires curiosity, a willingness to ask, "What do you remember that I don't?" And to hear the answer without interruption, without defensiveness. Freud called this free association, letting the truth flow without censorship. For a parent, this means opening the door to your child's pain without trying to fix it. Just listen, and then listen again. Because when someone finally feels heard, the walls begin to tremble. In that trembling, there is hope, not for a perfect relationship, but for an honest one. That relationship where love is not demanded, but earned through presence, through humility, through the courage to say, "I see now what I didn't see before." And when that moment happens, the past does not disappear, but it begins to lose its grip. There is a hidden grief that parents rarely name, the grief of being alive while feeling erased from their child's life. Freud understood this as a form of narcissistic injury. When a parent is rejected, it wounds not just the heart, but the self-image. How can they turn their back on me? Becomes a question that threatens identity. And the more we seek answers from outside, the more we overlook the one place we fear to go, within. The danger here is in misinterpreting distance as disrespect. Freud would caution us, the ego is fragile and it will protect itself with stories. They're selfish. They've been manipulated. It's their partner's fault. But these narratives, while soothing, are distractions. The deeper truth may be far more painful, that your child is not angry at who you are now, but at who you were when they needed you most. This realization can feel unbearable, but it is also liberating, because once you stop defending your past, you can begin repairing the present. Freud believed that insight, true insight, dissolves neurosis, and rejection at its core is a symptom of a deeper neurosis, a relationship pattern frozen in time, waiting for one side to wake up and say, "Let's stop repeating the pain." What if the act of reaching out to your child was not about rekindling what once was, but about creating something new, something built not on obligation but on mutual truth? This requires letting go of entitlement. You are not owed their forgiveness, but you are invited, if you dare, to enter their world, not as a parent demanding love, but as a human asking for connection. And that is the beginning of transformation. Not the return of the old bond, but the birth of something more mature, more raw, more real. Freud taught us that when we face what we most fear, we gain access to what we most long for. In this case, that longing is not just to be loved, but to be known. The most dangerous illusions in family are not the lies we tell others, but the ones we tell ourselves. It wasn't that bad. They'll understand one day. They're just going through a phase. Freud called these rationalizations defense mechanisms, mental barricades that protect the ego from painful truth. But protection becomes prison when it keeps us from real intimacy. If your child has gone silent, ask yourself, what have I silenced in me? What memories do I avoid? What truths do I soften? Because only when you face your own repression can you stop expecting your child to carry its weight. Freud believed that healing comes not from forgetting, but from remembering with clarity and feeling what was never allowed to be felt. This requires time, patience, and a radical shift in perspective. Stop asking, how do I get them back? Start asking, how do I become someone they feel safe returning to? Because the door is not locked from the outside, it is blocked by years of emotional clutter. Remove the pressure, remove the guilt. Replace it with presence, with consistency, with warmth that expects nothing in return. Sometimes the child you raised will never come back in the way you expect, But that does not mean the bond is forever broken. It means the form must change. Freud taught that psychic energy never disappears. It transforms. Love too must transform, from parenthood into personhood, from protector into witness, from giver into listener. And in that transformation, something sacred happens. The child begins to trust, not your perfection, but your authenticity. They begin to see not just the parent, but the person behind the role. And that person, flawed and real, is someone they might want to know again. Not because they have to, but because they choose to. Every parent-child relationship is built on a silent contract. I will care for you, and you will need me. But as the child grows, that contract must be rewritten. Freud understood this as the painful necessity of separation, the death of the parent ideal, and the birth of mutual recognition. Many parents resist this. They try to hold on to authority, to guilt, to memories as leverage, but all of it backfires because real love demands freedom. The adult child who steps away is not always running from you. Sometimes they are running toward themselves. They are trying to define who they are beyond your expectations, your fears, your legacy. And that can feel like betrayal, but Freud would argue, it is evolution. The child must kill the internalized parent figure in order to become whole. Not literally, but symbolically. It is the end of dependence and the start of individuation. This death is painful for both. You lose your role, they lose their guide. But if both survive the mourning, what follows can be a new kind of connection. One not based on need, but on truth. Freud would say, maturity begins when we stop blaming and start owning, when the parent owns their shadow, when the child owns their voice. This is not an easy process. There will be setbacks, words unsaid, wounds reopened. But if both sides keep showing up, not perfectly but honestly, the past begins to soften. The child may not forget, the parent may not fully understand. But in the space between remembering and forgiving, a new language can emerge. A language of presence, of mutual curiosity, of shared pain and shared healing. And in that space, rejection transforms, not into reunion, but into recognition, of two souls who once hurt each other in silence, now daring to meet again, with eyes open and hearts unguarded. The greatest paradox of rejection is that it often hides the deepest longing. The child who walks away may be saying, I needed more. And the parent watching them disappear whispers back, I didn't know how. Freud called this the tragic dance of unmet needs, where both sides ache, but neither knows how to say it without bleeding. But pain, when faced, becomes passage. Not a wall, but a bridge. The bridge is built not with apologies alone, but with truth. Raw, unpolished, uncomfortable truth. I see now. I missed it. I hurt you. These are not signs of weakness. They are the foundations of repair. And Freud would remind us, only the brave enter the unconscious and come back with light. If you're reading this as a parent estranged from your child, know this, you are not broken, but you are invited to grieve, to grow, to drop the armor, to risk hearing the truth without defending the past. Because in that risk lies the possibility of something greater than reconnection, redemption. And if you are the child, know this, your pain is real. Your silence was a signal. Your distance was not betrayal, it was the beginning of your voice. But healing doesn't always mean going back. Sometimes it means standing still long enough to be seen, without needing to explain. In the end, Freud would say, love survives not because it was never wounded, but because someone was willing to heal. Rejection, then, is not the final word. It is a comma, an invitation to pause, reflect, and choose. Not who you were, but who you are willing to become. When silence takes the place of love and absence fills the space once held by presence, what remains is not a void, but a question that echoes through the years, through birthdays missed and messages unanswered. Could we have loved each other differently, if only we had known how? What this journey through Freud's lens reveals is not a blame game, but a mirror that does not lie, but reflects the unspoken, the unconscious, the inherited. Behind every rejection there is a story, behind every distance a wound, and behind every wound, a longing still alive. The beauty and the pain of human connection is that it is never finished. A child never stops being a child in the eyes of a parent, and a parent never stops being the first home of a child's psyche. Even in silence, even in separation, that bond exists, wounded, frayed, distorted, but still waiting to be seen. Freud taught us that nothing truly ends in the unconscious. It waits, it transforms, it re-emerges in dreams, in symptoms, in sudden tears that surprise us. Healing then is not forgetting but remembering with new eyes. Maybe today is not the day for reconciliation. Maybe there are no words yet, only memories too raw to touch. But what matters is the movement, the willingness to see the other not as a villain or a victim, but as a human being carrying their own shadows. If you are a parent, perhaps the most loving thing you can offer now is not advice, but silence that listens. If you are a child, perhaps the bravest thing you can do is not return, but reflect on the truth of your own heart without shame or guilt. We all carry pieces of those who raised us, whether in our speech, our fears, or the way we love. The question is not how to erase that, but how to integrate it, to hold it with grace, to stop the cycle of unconscious repetition and become, for ourselves, what we once needed. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest act of healing is not reconnection, but recognition. I see you. I understand now. And I choose to grow from here. If this message stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a name you haven't said aloud in years, or a silence you've grown used to carrying, don't let it fade. Share this with someone who needs it. Leave your thoughts in the comments and let your story find space to breathe. And if you believe that understanding ourselves is the first step to changing the world around us, join us, subscribe, and walk this path of depth and meaning together. Because healing is not a moment, it's a movement, and it begins with you.